Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this seventh webinar organized by the World Fusion Organization, today with the title Free Zones Engine of Safety and Compliance. As you may know, for the last 2 months, we have been developing a series of webinars under the title Road to Recover, and today we will focus on one topic concretely, which is safety and compliance. I would like to share with you my screen to share with you some thoughts. So as you know, we are the organization of the free zones. We have 3,500 free zones in 165 countries, employing 80 million persons and hosting 3 million companies. We are headquartered in Dubai. We have at your disposal 10 regional offices, 26 national contact points and 7 ambassadors. And we are present in 130 countries out of this 165. We launched our organization in 2014, and since the day one, we launched the organization as Association of the Free Zone and the Free Zone Stakeholder. We believe it, we thought, we worked and we implemented our work, thinking that our role are 3. One is to improve the day-to-day work of the members and their stakeholders. Second is to integrate our members with their stakeholders and ecosystem. And third, it is to anticipate the need of our members and their stakeholders. All of this with only one main objective. It is to build free zones and free zone stakeholders resilient and bulletproof and resistant to any kind of somehow crisis or difficult time like the ones we are suffering now. And it is not just a matter of day. Just to show you that how we anticipated the need, in 2016, we launched a project called the Free Zone of the Future, in which we asked ourselves how a free zone look like to be bulletproof and resilient. And we reached the conclusion that this free zone should be as follows. A free zone and stakeholders should continue contributing to the business excellence of the country and contributing to the local and national economic development. On the top of it, free zones should assure quality, innovation, and sustainability. Quality through knowledge, through safety, security in the zone, through the use of the digital and improvement of the digital infrastructure, innovation through entrepreneurship, taking care about the small and medium enterprises, and innovating in the free zone management. Sustainability, taking care of the environment and being a good place to work, and assuring having a plan for the corporate social responsibility. Today, I'm with you and honored to have 3 excellent speakers to speak about one of the points of the best in class and equality, which is safety and security. These days, we have been bombarded by tons of reports, tons of questions, tons of futuristic, let's say, diagnostic about what will happen. Let's hear from our speakers and let's extract the most important conclusion from their work. So I'm honored to introduce you our 3 speakers. The first one to join me is His Excellency Complementary. He's recently appointed of the Secretary General of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. He will explain to you how this new trade area is called to be, and it's the biggest ever free trade area in the world. I will be after joined by Bruno Delay, a close friend and colleague. He's the President of Enterprise and Diplomacy, and he will introduce us the last trends in free zones, compliance, and safety. And after, I will leave the floor to my partner and colleague Lars to present you how safety can be the engine of the recovery. no further, I leave the floor to His Excellency Wankamele Mele. Excellency, I will be tough. You will have just 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamrouni. Thank you for inviting me to this very interesting discussion this morning. It's a pleasure for me to be with all of you, and I hope that one day we will, very soon, we can meet and have this discussion in person. I will try my best to stick within the 15 minutes so that we can have an opportunity for an exchange of views at the right time. As Dr. Hamrouni has explained, my name is Wamgele Mene. I'm the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And I was elected to this position by the Assembly of Heads of States of the African Union in February this year. So it is a very, very new organization. And certainly, of course, I am new to the position. I will discuss with you the overview of the African Continental Free Trade Area, its objectives, and what we intend to do to boost intra-Africa trade. And then I will discuss the safety and compliance measures that are built into the agreement. We'll have an assessment of the complementarity between free zones in Africa and the AfCFTA. And then I will conclude with some points. So this agreement was signed and adopted by the Assembly of Heads of States of the African Union, which is, the assembly is all 55 heads of states in Africa. They are all members of the assembly. And of the 55 members, the 55 heads of states who were in that meeting, 54 signed the agreement. It then entered into force on the 30th of May, 2019. And at the moment, we have 28 countries that have ratified the agreement. This takes it to be the most comprehensive and the biggest free trade area in the world, after the WTO, of course. And the objective is that it must be comprehensive in scope, and it must cover a range of economic activity: trade in goods, trade in services, intellectual property rights, investment protection, competition, and then, of course, electronic commerce. We will undertake the negotiations in two phases. In phase one, which is what we are almost concluding, and then the other areas will be phase two, and we will talk about that a little bit later. So as we all know, Africa has been faced with particular and unique challenges in terms of trade and investment. And one of those challenges is a smallness of national economies, the inability for many countries to achieve economies of scale. We have market fragmentation in Africa. We have a very, very narrow industrial development base, or manufacturing capacity is very narrow. And of course, we have a disintegration in trade and in investment market. And so when you look at the sum total of these factors, the heads of states decided that we really need to create a single set of rules that will govern trade and investment in Africa. And this is one of the tools. This agreement is the main tool for achieving harmonization of trade rules and harmonization of investment rules, so that as an investor, you can invest in a particular in country A in Africa, and also in country B, and be subject to the same rules and regulations, whether it comes to telecommunications, financial services, or whichever sector you decide to invest in. And all of this, we believe, will ensure that there is legal certainty and predictability of the market in Africa, which is, of course, was for a very long time the source of concern for intra-Africa investors, and also for global investors who are interested in the market. The ultimate objective is to boost intra-Africa trade, and to boost intra-Africa trade significantly beyond the 18% where it is estimated to be at the moment. We know that other regions have a higher rate of intra-regional trade, and we will talk about that in a minute. So now, when it comes to boosting intra-Africa trade, we believe that this agreement is central to that objective of boosting intra-Africa trade and of addressing the constraints that we have seen in the real economy: underdeveloped production structures, inadequate infrastructure for the facilitation of investment and for the facilitation of free zones. All of these factors are critical to boosting intra-Africa trade. Now, the starting point, of course, would be to reduce tariffs, and as I said earlier, to harmonize trade rules so that even after there has been a reduction in tariffs, the beyond the border measures do not inhibit and are not a barrier to trade. So we have to do both, which we are doing, reducing tariffs, which were quite high in intra-Africa trade. And also we are breaking down the barriers, the beyond the border measures. And we want to produce value-added goods. We do not think that it is in Africa's interest to continue to export primary commodities and to continue to rely on the export of primary commodities as the main pillar of our export profile as a continent. And so if you look at many countries that have been successful, they have shifted their production structures to value-added production. And we believe that if we do that on a sustained period of time, we will be able to contribute more than to global trade, global merchandise, global output. We will be able to contribute more than the 3% where at the moment Africa's contribution to global trade stands. I think the figures that you see there on intra-regional trade comparisons are interesting. And Africa, of course, is at the very lowest, with the European Union having a sustained, over many decades, sustained project of market integration. You see the results of the highest intra-regional trade and investment figure in the world is in the European Union. But our objective is to double intra-Africa trade in the next 5 years. And I believe that if we put the necessary foundations in place, it is possible to attain that target in the next 5 years. Now, the heart, I believe, of our conversation today is the safety and compliance measures, both in free zones and also in the trade agreement, and how this can be in a complementarity sense, how this can be a further boost to post-COVID-19 growth and recovery. So it's very important in any trade agreement to have rules and compliance, and certainly in this agreement we have done that. When you build rules of safety and compliance into an international trade agreement, that is how you facilitate access to global markets and to regional markets. To give you an example, Kenya exports flowers to Holland. Those flowers have to meet safety and compliance standards that are built not only in the agreement between the two countries, but they are also built into international trade agreements. And you are not able, as an exporter, you are not able to access global markets if you do not meet these safety and compliance measures that are both in the bilateral agreement and also in the in World Trade Organization standards. And typically these require that you have product standards and regulations. They are in the form of product standards and regulations. And what we have in the agreement is sanitary and phytosanitary measures. We have technical, and these relate to plant, human health. You cannot export an animal health. You cannot export animals if you don't meet certain requirements. You cannot export flowers if you don't meet certain requirements. And so these are very critical product standards and regulations. Same thing with technical barriers to trade. The bottled water that we drink, if you look behind the bottle, you will see there are technical standards that have been set out. That is critical for safety and compliance in any product. And so these are negotiated in a painstaking way over a sustained period of time between the global private sector players who are involved in the market. And then finally, in terms of product standards and regulations, national and regulatory compliance. You have to meet national continental regulatory compliance as part of your access to global markets. And if you don't meet these sets of standards and regulations, you do not get access to global markets. And this is critical for the safety of consumers around the world. Now, one of the areas that, and I'm very happy that I've been invited to this discussion, and I thank Dr. Hamruni for his leadership on this, because I think that it is very important that we explore, or we start a discussion about complementarity between free zones in Africa and the African Continental Free Trade Area. Because I think this is the only platform that is pan-African that is available for us to engage on the basis of, for economic development purposes and for the purposes of attracting investment into Africa in areas that are very, very critical. And we recognized this complementarity because if you look at Article 23 of the agreement, there we specifically state state parties may support the establishment and operation of special economic arrangements or zones for the purpose of accelerating development. So already you can see that when we were framing this agreement, we foresaw that there would have to be a role for free zones in the context of developing Africa's economy, both investment and in trade. And you know better than me a range of examples in terms of how free trade zones or arrangements have made a contribution to many countries in Africa to their investment profile. And so the policy and regulatory convergence is something that is between free zones, is something that is critical, that, as I say, we should explore further, because free zones are an incubator of industrial development, of digital trade. We know that, for example, the Atlas Mara Group has started manufacturing the very first smartphone in Africa. It is being manufactured in a free zone in Durban, South Africa. So it shows you that digitization should also be part of our strategy as we seek to achieve this dual contribution of free trade zones to growth and development. Of course, there are very positive spin-offs, job creation and boosting trade capacity. This particular free trade zone in Durban has created thousands and thousands of jobs, and Atlas Mara coming in to manufacture smartphones in that free zone has further contributed to job creation in South Africa. And most importantly, it is also feeding into the global value chain. This is what free zones do. They feed into, they enable a country to feed into a global value chain, which is one of our key objectives in the African Continental Free Trade Area, the development and establishment of regional value chains to access global value chains and to move up the value chain. So this complementarity, in my view, is absolutely critical, and it is something that we have to explore further going forward. So let me just conclude, as I said, so that we can have time for discussion by saying the following. I believe that there is a great deal of scope for cooperation between the World Free Zones Organization and the AfCFTA Secretariat, ourselves, and we can identify specific areas. I think I've just mentioned digital trade, boosting investment in free trade zones on the back of the rules that are set out and the market access that is provided by the AfCFTA agreement, because that is our objective, to open markets, and to open markets in countries where they may not have been open, and to do so based on rules and regulations that are pre-negotiated and agreed to by 55 countries in Africa. I think we should explore a partnership and as I say, identify joint areas of specific collaboration. We could do this by joint investment missions, an area that I know that you are particularly active in. We could leverage on your expertise for the development of SEZ regulations in the AfCFTA, which is something that we have identified the need to have a set of regulations, but those regulations are not yet developed. And so I think it's critical that we work together to develop those SEZ regulations. And finally, again, I want to stress the importance of SEZs in a country's ability to access global value chains and to access investment and to be at the cutting edge of technological advancement, in the same way that we have seen with the example of Atlas Mara in the Dube Port Special Economic Zone in South Africa. So I really, again, I want to thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this discussion, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you very much, Wamkele, for this great presentation. I think all our colleague speakers here and even all the participants will coincide with me if I say that you have a huge challenge, and you can count on us in developing it. I encourage all the participants to share with us their Q&A, and before going ahead with our agenda, let me just ask Wamkele a very short question: how the current pandemic situation is affecting the implementation of this trade area? This is a question coming from Nigeria, impacting the implementation of this free trade area.
Well, we are, of 55 countries in Africa, 42 are either in a partial or full lockdown. Mm-hmm. Borders are closed, and governments are quite sensibly and correctly focusing on fighting the pandemic. We had intended that we start trading under the AfCFTA now on the 1st of July. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, it appears that it will not be possible to do that. In some cases on the borders, countries are lining up 30 to 40 kilometers because the borders are closed. And so we cannot really credibly claim that we're trading when the borders are closed. And so we are waiting for the situation to normalize, for the borders to be reopened, and we will get back to trading under the agreement when the conditions on the ground are conducive enough for us to be able to do that. But I think for now, the focus for many African governments is to save lives and to fight the pandemic. And that, as I say, is quite a sensible and a correct and a responsible thing to do. So thank you.
Thank you for this clear answer. Before leaving the floor to my next speaker, I would like to share a poll question with all the participants. The question is, are you confident in your business model that it is resilient enough to recover from the impact of this crisis? One option, less than 6 weeks, from 6 weeks to 6 months, or more than 6 months. You have, please, participant, 1 minute to answer to this question. We have seen that almost more, okay, the half is between 6 weeks to 6 months, and the other half is more than 6 months. It means that really the situation is as tough as we imagine. I leave the floor to Bruno. Bruno, as always, I'm really expecting a good presentation from you, and you have 15 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Samir. Can we start with the presentation? Okay, I will try to present the following items. First, to evaluate what are the main trends towards more compliance and transparency in the global economy and global trade. Second point, we'll try to see what are the consequences for the free trade zones around the world, especially in Africa and Asia. And third, we are going to see what kind of instruments are at our disposals regarding the free trade zones to try to comply with these global trends toward more transparency and compliance. So I will pass very quickly through, because everybody knows that, what are the main trends towards more compliance and transparency. We know that illicit trade is a plague. The OECD has evaluated the global amount of illicit trade in the world roughly to $500 billion per year regarding illicit trade or infringements of intellectual property or counterfeiting. So you know what is it about? Wildlife trafficking, corruption, terrorism financing, money laundering, smuggling, counterfeiting, etc., etc. To try to organize a little bit the fight against those plagues, we have seen in the recent years a lot of regulations, standards, certification system, associations of genuine associations which are trying to put some order in the trade of certain goods. For example, for the diamonds, we have the Kimberley process. For the oil and gas industry, we have the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. For the tobacco, we have the WHO and FCTC protocol. We have the European Tobacco Products Directive from 2014. For wildlife trafficking, we have the CITES Convention. For gold and precious metals, the conflict-free gold standard. We have for wood, we have also the, of course, we have the EU regulation, but we have also the timber regulation, but we have also a process of certification of tropical woods, which is in place and it's functioning. For palm oil, we have the RSPO standard. For maritime transportation, we have the ICC Declaration of Intent to prevent the transport of maritime counterfeit goods. For health products and medicine, we have the Medicrime Convention. In fact, we have a mushrooming process of conventions, standards, certification process around the world for all kinds of goods. And free trade zone cannot ignore this general trend. All the major actors of the international trade, insurance company, banking system, maritime freight companies, logistic companies, big corporations, all the operators cannot ignore those new regulations coming up every day. If they ignore them, they will face a lot of difficulties. All of them need now to secure totally their supply chain and to be sure that at all the steps of their supply chain, precautionary measures have been taken to prevent all those kind of risks. So since nobody can ignore this trend, today the leitmotif is comply or die for the big corporations. if you don't comply, you are facing not only possible legal consequences, but also reputational consequences. If we take, for example, all the standards which the OECD has been put into force recently regarding anti-bribery, regarding the public integrity, regarding taxes, regarding mineral supply chains, you have a whole set of standards which have been set up in the recent years. And you see that the economic operators have to follow more or less those standards. For example, if we take recently, a very recent news regarding anti-money laundering, recently, and this concerns Africa, for example, the European Commission has decided to put on the blacklist, because they consider that the standards regarding anti-money laundering are not at the proper level, have decided to put on the blacklist a new group of countries. Regarding the African countries which have been put 2 days ago on this blacklist, you will find Mauritius, you will find Ghana, you will find Botswana, you will find Zimbabwe, for example, just to take those accounts. The consequences for those countries are huge, because this will have a lot of consequences regarding the banking system, regarding the economic and financial operation with those countries at the moment they have been put on the blacklist of the European Commission. So nobody can ignore today this general trend. FTZ are part of the global supply chain. They cannot ignore those trends. And of course, in the recent years, free trade zones have been under high scrutiny, let's say, of the international community and the international business community regarding the risk they represent, because some free trade zones have considered that no tax means no regulations. And it is a wrong understanding of what is a free trade zone. A free trade zone is a special economic zone where there is no tax, no customs. Everybody agrees on that. But this doesn't mean that there should be no regulation at all. And you have a lot of international bodies like the FATF, BASCAP of the International Chamber, the World Customs Organization, the OECD, the UNODC, which have stated that a free trade zone can represent a risk on the supply chain. And you have also a general trend today coming especially from the United States and other economic entities which are pushing for more protectionism, for more protectionist measures. And we do not want the free trade zones to be caught in this process against free trade. Of course, the consequences for the reputation and management of activities in free trade zones are huge. I don't need to remind them. We'll see what are the reactions and what are the tools now which are in the hands of the free trade zones in order to be more compliant. First, we have the OECD Recommendation on the Code of Conduct, the WFSO Safe Zone Program, and I will not extend because I know that Lars is going to explain what is at stake in this Safe Zone Program. I could give also some example of best practices in free trade zones and some private sector initiatives regarding free trade zones. So let's look at the Code of Conduct of the OECD. We consider that this can be a game changer for the free trade zones if they accept to, on a voluntary basis, to put this Code of Conduct as an objective for their compliance program. The Council of Ministers of the OECD has adopted last October this Code of Conduct. Now they need to give it more precise tools. That's the objective of the elaboration of 2 toolkits which will complement this Code of Conduct and which give to the free trade zones the possibility to have a kind of a procedure to comply in a program of a few years to be totally fully compliant with the Code of Conduct of the free trade zone. The World Free Zone Organization is currently drafting the Safe Zone Program guidelines, which is excellent. And I understand, Samir, that very soon you are going to issue a kind of white paper where you will explain all the details of this process, which is excellent. We consider that the Safe Zone Program represents a promising opportunity to fight counterfeiting and illicit trade in free trade zones. It will help to disseminate the OECD Code of Conduct with on a voluntary basis within the free trade zones. At the end of this process, there will be a certificate issued either by the local customs or either by a third party, reliable third party, or internationally recognized third party, will establish that this free trade zone is compliant with the OECD Code of Conduct on all the details included in the toolkits of this Code of Conduct. So it means that all the economic operators will have at their disposal a benchmark, a standard, which will make a distinction between the compliant free trade zones and the ones which still are not compliant. I gave some example, but I will not extend myself because we have a limited time. And for example, a few free trade zones which are in the Safe Zone program, like Klaipėda in Lithuania, the free port of Luxembourg also, which is a good example. We take the example also of Panama. You know that the colon free trade zone was the subject of a lot of criticism in the past, and the government of Panama has taken some very interesting initiative to try to make these colon free trade zones more compliant with international standards. Here you have some details of the measures which have been taken by the government of Panama and the colon free trade zone administration. Here I review how state regulation can enhance in the case of Panama. I would like to mention here a new initiative, which is the DCSA information model. What is a DCSA? It's a non-governmental association which groups all the main players of the shipping industry. You have MSC, Maersk, CMA CGM, Hapag-Lloyd, ONE, Evergreen, HMM, the big players of maritime transportation. And this association, which is a non-profit organization, has launched a lot of initiatives to try to introduce a system of track and tracing of the containers on the whole supply chain, which will be which will have the same standard, so you can track the container on all its routes from the production to the consumer. And also, which will bring also possibility to install IoT internet on objects on those containers. This initiative should be looked at very closely by the free trade zones administrators, because this can bring, by using this tool, transparency, tracking of the goods inside the free trade zones, which container come in, which container come out, and to follow the route of the containers. I just mentioned that because it is something new. They issued some standards in January last year, and they just issued new standard for IoT 1 month ago. No, 6 months, 6 months. That the effectiveness of this program will depend on the number of mutual recognition agreements which exist around the world. For example, if the free trade zones of Lomé, Togo obtains from the Togolese customs the status of authorized economic operator, this status will be recognized by the European customs, for example, only if there is a mutual recognition agreement between the Togolese customs and the European customs. So we rely for the validity of the IEO program on the number of mutual recognition agreements which have been already signed or which are going to be signed. If we look at Africa, for example, among the 84 agreements which have been signed in the world, mutual recognition agreements for IEO programs, only 5 have taken place in Africa. So the road is long. And I mentioned that because for me it's very important that the excellent initiative which has been taken by the African head of states in order to create an African unique market. It's very important that they include in their program of work the multiplication of mutual recognition agreement between the African customs and the third party and the other customs in the world. So I go on with what I said about the complementary situation between the OECD Code of Conduct and the ILO programs. My conclusion is that the free trade zones today have several tools at their disposal to comply with this global trend toward more transparency and compliance. Those tools are, first, the W Free Trade Zones Safe Zone Program, one. Second, the OECD Code of Conduct. Third, the SAFE program or the Authorized Economic Operator program. So three main tools can be completed by other instruments. I refer, for example, to the DCSA, Digital Container Shipping Association system, transparency system, or interoperability system, or tracking system. I think that the World Free Zone Organization is doing an excellent job. You are at the beginning of this process. You have today between 5 and 6 free trade zones which have entered your Safe Zone program. I hope it will be extended very quickly to a wider number, a bigger number of free trade zones of your organization. And you have to know also that on the side of this OECD, the working group which has been working on the Code of Conduct is now an official group of the OECD that has been fully endorsed by the OECD organization. And I hope that within 1 year, we'll have the toolkits ready. And this will bring, of course, in the hands of the free zones, new instruments to comply with the new requisite of the international trade. Thanks to that, I think that the free trade zone will become stronger, more accepted, and will face in a better position the global trend to more protectionism that we are going to witness in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruno. Merci énormément. I have just a word of gratitude for Bruno, for Chantal, for enterprise and diplomacy. We knew each other in an event in Alicante, Spain in 2017. And since that time, they didn't stop to encourage, to help, to orient and direct. And if today, I'm proud to say that I have a flagship project called Safe Zone, is because of their patient help and support. I encourage all the participants to go ahead and put their questions. And I have one for you, Bruno. Perhaps you will think about it and you will share with us your thoughts. It seems that today we are going through if it is not the end, to the reduction of, or let's say decrease of the weight of the globalization, and we are going more towards a regionalization, which I doubt, but this is what is almost written in all the places, and I'm just sharing with you one of the questions. What can be the role of zones if we are going towards more regionalization? What can be the role of the free zones within this new framework? I move very quickly to share with you the second poll question. So, how will COVID-19 impact your level of revenue? A reduction of 25%, a reduction between 25-35%, and more than 36%. You have 1 minute to answer our question, please. I see that more than a third, 35% see that a reduction of their revenue between 25 to 35%, and almost the whole of the participants think that they will have more than 36% reduction of their revenue. I move to my friend, colleague, and partner Lars' presentation. Lars, thank you so much to make a place in your agenda for us. I know that in less than 35 minutes, you have a presentation with the UK Parliament. Everybody knows that one of the most important programs of the UK within the Brexit program, it is to establish free port and free zones, and the UK Parliament will hear from you your feedback on it. So thank you for making our place in your agenda, and I leave you the floor. I remind you, as all the speakers, you have just 15 minutes.
Salam, Dr. Samir, and thank you very much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to speak today on these very important topics. Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. I will speak about the free zones, engines of safety and compliance in the perspective of safe zone. That's been mentioned by previous speakers and specifically by Bruno Delay just before here. I am Lars Carlson, and I'm head and MD and CEO of KDA Global Consulting. We're working specifically with customs and borders, but my background is in customs. I've been a customs officer, civil servant for 25 years. Before joining KDH, I was director of World Customs Organization, working with the safe standards, the international standards that is now the element that is taking care of these things, including the authorized economic operator regime. And before that, I was the head of Swedish customs for a number of years. Having worked with customs, borders, and trade policy for many years. And of course, we live in an age of globalization. It is a stormy place to be in. We've seen a number of also crises coming along, from security crisis to commodity price crisis, global financial crisis. We've had a migrant crisis, and now we have a health crisis on, and this is the way globalization looks. We are connected, interconnected in a totally different way today. And of course, the COVID-19 coronavirus crisis have already impacted us all, including trade development. And we know that trade development is extremely important for the world. It is what connects us, but it's also what develops nations and our social systems. It creates growth, and of course, it fights poverty. And that are all issues where the free zones of the world have a role to play. And we are now talking about the impact of COVID-19 and corona crisis on that specific fact. We know that trade will have to be a part, and trade recovery have to be an important, essential part of economy recovery after the pandemic. And there's no doubt about that. There are discussions, as Dr. Sami said before, around, and one of the participants asked as well, of regionalization, maybe even de-globalization. We've seen issues around it, and as I'm a part of a number of think tanks and research networks worldwide looking into this, we can see, of course, effects on this. Having in mind, though, that even during the pandemic, our borders have been open for goods. And that has been, again, a very important part to also fight the pandemic, getting medicines, medical treatments, equipment, and many other things into our countries, even though it's been difficult to travel. And that will continue. And I agree with Dr. Samir in the sense that what we do see is that we are moving from just-in-time delivery type of models to just-in-case delivery kind of models, where there will also have to be more backup systems to make sure that we do get the goods we need in the right place at the right time. So some of the things that will be more important is predictability, even sometimes more important than speed. And that means that we need systems that are sustainable. And that means more compliance, as previous speakers has been talking about as well. And the way we handle compliance and risk in the international supply chain since 2 decades ago is about risk management. We have become more and more better in different ways of measuring what is the risks involved in international trade. We do so by having access to data from not only about the goods, but about the people moving the goods, the information that follows every goods stream, and of course the payments that is also following the streams of goods moving back and forward. Because we know that the illegal activities are an international trans-border crime, are seeing no borders at all. They only see opportunities, and we need to counterattack that to have trade development as recovery and as building of our societies. And of course, the risk management programs only detect the risks. And I always have to underline that risks are not a problem. They're only a problem if you don't know about them. But as long as you know about them, you can do something about them. But what do we do with the rest, which is maybe 90% of the flow of goods moving across our world, specifically in the international supply chain, and more importantly, the last 5-6 years, the more integrated value chains we do see. All countries today need to be a part of a global value chain, and the global value chains are more and more interactive and more interacting with each other. And that means, again, that these are important questions when goods are moving from one place to another, and they will continue to move because the underlying trends of globalization in relation to trade when it comes to e-commerce, which we only seen the start of, consumer patterns of the world, which again will still be there even more after a pandemic and financial crisis as a follow of pandemics. And that means we need to have inclusiveness of the supply chain. We will see stockpiling, we will see movement of goods into warehousing, closer to markets and so forth. And we will see the use of specific supply chains. And again, where all the supply chain stakeholders are important. Because the international standards that is regulating this and was mentioned before as well, one of them is the SAFE framework of standards, which I had the honor to work on 15 years ago and was put in place and is now is covering 98% of international trade, has always had the idea that we would need supply chain coverage of these type of compliance management programs, like the Authorized Economic Operator Program or similar models that is based on risk, but at the same time also fosters compliance, fosters the way we do business in a proper way, fulfilling the obligation and together working through the supply chain to avoid risks involved. So we have heard from Bruno Delay about the challenges that's been there when it comes to one of the stakeholder players, namely the free zones, which at the same time has developed into new types of special economic zones the last 5 to 6, 7 years. And of course, this is extremely important because free zones per definition is outside customs territory. And by that is the reason for sometimes creating also increased risks. If we want to use these new types of free zones, the new breed of free zones, the paradigm of more safer, cleaner zones, as a part of the stakeholders in the international supply chain, being engines and nodes and routers of the international trading system and the global value chains we talked about with inclusiveness, then safe zones need to be also the zones that in very many ways fosters governance, fosters transparency and integrity. So we need to create alternatives for those authorized economic operators, around 100,000 in total in the world, and also those other operators that wants to be a part of the global value chains and the global international supply chains that we do have. That is why the World Free Zone Organization, as mentioned, has developed, designed, implemented, and piloted a specific compliance management program based on risk. It has processes, it has a heart, an engine of the program in the Code of Conduct that was developed by the OECD. And this is extremely important because the aim of this program is to find a way of implementing the Code of Conduct in a consistent way through different free zones around the world, making them accessible to the global value chains. And again, offering alternatives for those who want to work through free zones and special economic zones based on compliance and want to be a part of the international supply chains. It also has security declarations because the zones themselves is one partner and one player in this international supply chain. The inhabitants, the companies working in the free zones are another very important part of this. And this is a structured approach that we're working on. So I'll explain a little bit more for the next 5 minutes around what the safe zones are. So this is what the safe zone process looks like. It's a structured approach. It's based on risk management. It is voluntary. It uses the Code of Conduct of OECD, again, to have one Code of Conduct for these type of behaviors. It has a security declaration, which is for the companies in the zones to clearly show that they do understand what the Code of Conduct implementation means. There's a self-assessment after an online voluntary application, which means around 50 different questions. Is a guideline to the zones and its companies to know what this is about, what are the requirements to be a clean, safe zone. There is a validation site inspection done by a third-party, independent, recognized validator, certifier, that looks at the work done in the self-assessment phase. And of course, also do risk mapping to see what are the still remaining risks we need to tackle. The validation report itself moves into a two-step process, which I will show you in a while. Either there is a grounds for meeting the requirements of the process, then you will get a certificate and a platinum certificate of being a safe zone, or we find the validator finds that the zone is applicable, but still missing remaining a few of the requirements to become a safe zone, then they will have a level 1 maturity, where they can, during 1 year, finalize the process and then become a level 2 platinum certificate safe zone. Or if they don't meet the requirements, they will drop out of the system and have to apply again when the conditions are there. There's also a system, because this is not where the process stops. It's actually the time when the process starts. So now it's about following up, monitoring, reviewing with incident reporting, central analysis, a whistleblower system in place to find early warning in zones if there are problems, and again a revalidation ending up in a re-evaluation after a period of time to become and stay and also grow as a safe zone itself. The validation will be done by, as was said before, third-party validators. It could be a recognized organization that is doing this, accredited by World Free Zone Organization and recognized internationally, or a customs administration in a country where there is an AAO program in line with the international standards from the WCO, World Customs Organization, that has signed a mutual recognition agreement with another of WCO members, and in that sense have validated their AAO program to be in line with the standards. And this is what the model looks like. It fosters integrity, increases transparency, it creates a compliance record. So after 2 years, because this is one of the requirements to be that authorized economic operator player in the WCO system that Bruno Delay was talking about. After 2 years, there is a compliance record. There has been transparency for customs and other agencies involved in enforcement and monitoring of the compliance levels and the transparency, integrity of zones and other stakeholders. Then there could also be an application to the customs administration in a country with an AO program to also become an AO. And of course, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that this leads in line with other international standards, with other rules and regulations that are set to, again, enhance the entire international supply chain, which has been explained by Bruno Delay before, that the OECD is working on, and other organizations with them, supporting them in that process. And of course, we do see Safe Zone as a step, a practical step of implementing the Code of Conduct in a proper way, with has to be and will be transparent, which will have different ways of mechanisms of proving this, both through the Safe Zone program itself with the World Free Zone Organization, later on with other organizations like the OECD's toolkit and instruments, and of course, again, also for the customs administrations around the world, if then also meeting the requirements of the Safe Framework of Standards, AEO standard. Again, the idea would be that you're only doing this process once. You're doing it in a practical way because the results are the important thing. And of course, this should not be alone, because it's always important to do these things, not in isolation, but as a part, and it was said by the Secretary General before as well, the inclusiveness and opportunities for these special economic zones and free zones to actually, in different ways, be included in international supply chain is important, because there are risks there. And as always, it's the weakest link of the chain that is important. And we always travel better together. And of course, that will lead to some of the more far-going recovery plans that are now discussed in UK, as I will do, as Dr. Samir said, with the Parliament and the House of Commons in just a few minutes, but also in many other places where trade recovery and trade development will become extremely important. What we do see is that the special economic zones and the free zones of the world can become those engines of international trade, but it has to be done in a system of security, safety, compliance, transparency, and integrity. Those zones that will meet those requirements will become and have opportunities to be hubs in the new paradigm of trade superhighways that we already see emerging, because the predictability that crises are creating, like the pandemic we are now in, are that there need to be more predictability, more compliance from importers, exporters, transporters, service providers, and of course the hubs, ports, airports, and free zones of the world. Those who meet those requirements will be able to access those value chains, will become nodes in those trade superhighways, where we will have all information, all through the supply chain, available for both scrutiny by international organizations and national and regional entities to make sure that this is happening in a safe and secure way with minimum interference and with early adoption of risks awareness. So we can make sure that trade can move frequently, can move in a good way and a safe and secure way. So those zones that are now interested in becoming not only those engines and those drivers of economy in the national context, but also in the regional intra-African context, or in other regions as well, or parts and nodes of this international trade network, should seriously consider of early adopting these new standards that comes from the World Free Zone Organization, that will again move into using the Code of Conduct of the OECD and the measures of the OECD, will be able again also to meet the requirements and standards of the customs community and other enforcement agencies. And of course, in the future, we need a lot of superheroes. We will need heroes of all kinds, and those who are the future superheroes are, of course, those who are early adopters into these new systems of compliance and new systems of interlinking different ways of transparent trade superhighways. I hope that many that listens to this and listens to Bruno, me, and the Secretary General, and to Dr. Samir and all the rest of us working to make this happening, also takes the opportunities and see the opportunities in doing this. This is the way forward. This is how we want to move ahead. And if we do so, if we get a lot of free zones that are safe zones, that can be clean zones in other programs, AEO, stakeholders in the international supply chain, then we have a chance of really using trade as the recovery of crisis, not only this one, but also future ones. So please look into this. Go to the World Free Zone Organization and have a look on how you become a safe zone. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you as always, Lars, and thank you also as always for projecting my picture is in your last slide. I really appreciate it. So before letting you go, I have two questions to you, Lars, and I give you 1 minute to think about it, the time you project our third and last poll question. I have a question for you from the UAE. What is the impact of the current situation, generally speaking, about the customs? You are a guy from the customs, so what is the impact on it? And Mamadou from Morocco is asking if integrating free zones with the customs authorities and the other stakeholder will facilitate fighting illicit trade. 1 or 2 minutes for us to share the third poll question, and I will be back to you, Lars. How your entity change its way of working, ensure the well-being of your people, ensure the safety of your productive asset, implement new communication tools to work remotely. Okay. The third 35% think that we have to assure the well-being of our people. 16% assure the safety of productive assets, and almost half of the participants think that we need to implement in new communication tools to work remotely. Lars, before letting go to UK Parliament, please your answer to our two questions. Impact on the customs and linking zones with their stakeholders.
Yes, I think first question about the customs world. I think the customs world have been very active. It's again very much so that customs have been active around the borders, around the world when it comes to the pandemic and the situation we're in. Again, making sure that medical equipment and groceries and whatever we need. Also, when there's been shutdowns and close downs of societies, to actually protect our people from the pandemic. World Customs Organization has been very active in signing different types of agreements with other organizations involved in international supply chain to make this possible, and to use the guidelines that's already been developed and that are there for this. I think that again, it shows that these are extremely important functions that we have. They will become even more important after the pandemic when we are recovering from this. And I think the customs has a very important role to play, and more with advanced systems we have with smart borders and different other types of facilitation by our borders. This is the way forward, and this will now be accentuated. It's also in the Brexit situation, which is the biggest trade flow in the world, shown very clearly that the integrated value chains we have, again, and I fully agree with that, has to be inclusive to all parts of the world. But that means that the border issues and the customs issues are more important than ever, and including the issues of working together with free zones and special economic zones, and the new generation of those type of zones that are not tax havens, but actually are dynamic, oriented parts of the supply chain, driving the process of trade in a sustainable, secure, and safe way. And I think customs is very willing to take that step in most parts of the world, but it's a maturity process, obviously. Sorry, the second question again, Samir, could you repeat that?
Connecting free zones with their stakeholders can help in fighting illicit trade.
Yes, very much so. Like in all parts of the stakeholder chain of the international supply chain, what we have seen is it's much more efficient with system-based controls and involving people in the supply chain in avoiding these risks that are there. We don't want the risks, any of us. We want, as a zone or inhabitant, to get again, companies working in the zones that are also secure, safe, and compliant traders. And those compliant traders want to trade more. And to do so, of course, we need systems that enhances and supports the way of correct behavior and does the opposite to those who don't. And it becomes then a market issue, which is the important thing, that inhabitants of zones can also ask their zone to become safe zones and become clean zones and become this type of using the Code of Conduct of OECD and other measures. By doing so, that is the alternative they should choose. And the free zones and special economic zones and free ports that actually also develop in that direction will be the ones where the players of the future will actually be, to be more compliant and also fighting future types of crisis. As I said before, when it comes to the changes of the supply chains that will now take place. So I think it's very important to do that. And I think that the inhabitants can very much use the facilities of Safe Zone and these type of systems to actually be more involved, and by that protecting themselves.
Thank you so much, Lars. I know that you have to rush.
Have to run, yes. Bye-bye for today. Thank you.
Give our regards to the UK Parliament and tell them welcome to the club.
They do need some advice, so I will try to give them that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bruno. Let me start with the same question that I shared now with Lars. Why do you think that linking free zone with their stakeholders, the customs, the government, will help to fight illicit trade in your opinion?
Let's start from a broader point of view, Samir, if you allow me.
Yes, please.
We have today in the international trade two phenomena. First, we don't have anymore a referee. Before, the World Trade Organization was more or less the referee for trade disputes. This referee today is absent, is paralyzed for a lot of reasons I will not enter. Second point, we have this rising trend towards more protectionism. We see that in the US, we see that even in Europe, and we see now emerging a broader discussion between countries about what they call the level playing field. And I don't want free trade zones to be trapped in this debate and to be the hostages of such a debate where free trade zones will be pointed at as inhibitors or perturbators of the level playing field, because we can accuse free trade zones of hiding subsidies through tax exemptions or giving extra advantages to competitors in the international trade. The best protection for me in the future for free trade zones, in order to avoid to be trapped in this wave of protectionism, rising wave of protectionism, is to be the more compliant as they can. The more compliant you will be, the safer you will be in this future debate which is growing in the international trade disputes. That's my opinion. And this is the reason why free trade zones, together with the economic operators, which Lars mentioned a few minutes ago, should work together to ensure that free trade zones are compliant, safe, and clean.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. I have another question, please, and this also is coming from Nigeria. I will add on it an element. Bruno, you have been ambassador in Mexico, in Spain, in Togo, a lot of continent. So the question from our colleague from Nigeria, is it really the end of the globalization?
No, I don't think to that point, because globalization will remain. I mean, but it will be corrected. It will be amended. We'll have less multilateralism and more bilateral negotiations between big entities in the international trade. This is the case, for example, with Europe, which is negotiating bilateral agreements, trade agreements, with a lot of countries around the world, the latest one being Singapore, Japan, Canada, United States for the time being it's stopped. We'll see in the future what is going to happen with the UK and the trade agreements which the UK is going after Brexit to foster with United States on the rest of the world. So I think that more and more we have to rely on bilateral agreements, trade agreements between the big economic entities in the world, and less on multilateral rules, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm preparing myself tomorrow. I have another webinar with our regional office in North Latin America, in Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, and I'm 100% sure that this question will raise again. So thank you for your contribution. We reached the end of this webinar. I need to thank His Excellency Wamkele, my colleague Lars, and special as always, thanks to Bruno and his team, to Chantal, that I know she's there, and thank you for all your support. I will finish with some announcement. All the participants and the registered in this event will receive a copy of the presentations of the speakers. They will receive from us also 2 books that we have edited the last month. One, it is our annual report about the free zone outlook. And the second will be how the free zones have to link with their stakeholders in order to improve their value and improve and be more resilient. So this will be exactly 24 hours after the end of this webinar. And as Lars and Bruno mentioned it, I will be distributing Monday, 29th of June, my white paper, which is our thoughts and our belief, and let's say the pillar of our flagship project called a Safe Zone. And I will hope that by 20th of July, the call for zones to adhere to our program, Safe Zone, will be open. So we reached the end of this webinar. Let me perhaps share with you a personal thought. You have been and we have been bombarded by tons of reports, tons of articles, tons of opinions about the impact of the pandemic situation on us. Perhaps I can summarize these tons of papers in 3 impacts. This pandemic situation will suppose more debt for the government, will suppose speeding of the digitalization, and will suppose somehow reduction of the globalization. But I completely and fully agreed with Ambassador Bruno. We don't have, as a free zone, to be trapped there. I think globalization brought a lot to the humanity. Free zone has contributed a lot to the economic and local prosperity. Globally and locally thriving together should be our way and our forward and our way to recover. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Bankale. And thank you, Lars. See you in our next webinar, June 30. Have a nice day. Thank you.